back to the channel. In this bumper episode, I've got 3 bespoke handmade projects that I get wrapped up and fitted to the car. So without further ado, let's get on with the episode. Something that I did need to upgrade in the car was my battery. Now, I did actually take the battery that was in the GT40 and put it into one of my other cars. So that gave me a good excuse to upgrade what was in the car and get myself a small race battery. I did toss up between the Varley Red Top and the Odyssey PC1100, and it basically boiled down to cost. As soon as it arrived, I set about cutting up the old battery tray so it fitted the new smaller Odyssey battery. Keeping things nice and simple because nothing was on show, made myself a nice robust strap to hold down the battery, and then had the battery tray repowder coated in satin black. All of that took a week or so, so once I was in a position to do so, I then got everything fitted back into the car. The battery tray obviously fitted in perfectly because it was once in that spot, and then this new smaller Odyssey fits in much easier than the old battery once did. And with the battery top cover in place, you can see here the external tender port that I've got plugged in to the C-Tech charger, keeping that battery in tip-top shape. For those of you that have been following for some time may recall the fact that I remade the back portion of the chassis. I refabricated myself the hinge mechanism for the rear clam to make mine quick release. Now, something that I did want to add since I actually carried out that work was just a very subtle rear diffuser. Now, this is inspiration taken from the race cars that did have something similar. So with some very simple cardboard templates, just mucking around with some ideas just to see what worked, how it was going to fit to the underside of the chassis, which I then transferred through to some aluminium sheet. So I thought I'd recorded the whole time lapse of me cutting out the cardboard template onto a sheet of aluminium, but I forgot to press record. So here it is. So what I'll do is just finish a few of the edges, give them a bit of a clean up, and then start to put the radius in the backside of the diffuser panel where it comes up around the back of the gearbox. And yeah, give it a little try for size. I've got the diffuser in place, and I must admit I couldn't have tried to fit it any better if I wanted. So the radius that I very quickly and roughly just put in is pretty much spot on. It allows me to open the rear clam and it clears that lower bottom edge. I know it's going to be really difficult to try and make sense of any of these angles, but you can see I've just got it held in place with a couple of clamps just to make sure we're good with clearances around pickup points and suspension arms and bits and pieces. So as a test fit, it's shaping up really quite nicely. So the next thing I need to do is mark the position of the chassis rails in the top side of the diffuser, and then mark out where I want my holes. I need to put a small crease in the panel where the angle of the chassis changes slightly, but again, that will make sense when you see me do it. Adding some detail to the top edge of the diffuser, I just put myself in a couple of nice radius curves just to take that sharp corner off of that top edge, make it a little bit more subtle. And then here, putting in that crease that I needed to pick up on the change of chassis angle. So the rear panel is starting to shape up. I've just started fine-tuning some of the edges, put a couple little bends in as I spoke about that I needed. But what I want to do to this panel is try and give it a little bit more detail and to try and get away from it looking like, you know, a very simple bent up piece of aluminium sheet. And I want to try and do that by adding a rolled beaded edge around the perimeter of the panel. So I'm going to run this through the bead roller and hopefully not ruin this panel. not sure whether you'll be able to make out this on the camera, but there's a really nice subtle little radius bead all the way around the perimeter of this now. Not along this front portion here, because that's where it mounts up to the chassis, but certainly everywhere else. It's gone in really nicely. Now, it's not perfect, so I'm going to spend some time with the hammer and dolly, just really sort of refining some of these edges. But I'm really quite happy with how this has turned out. I'm hoping this will now turn out to be quite a nice panel. I've now got the diffuser held into place with a few clicos, and the rolled edges really help to take away from that flat sheet appearance that I was worried about. It's all fitting into place quite nicely. I need a little bit of trimming along the front edge just to get it to interact nicely with the other panels that I've got on the underside of the car. Yeah, we're getting close to riv nuts into the chassis and, well, ticking it off the list, I suppose. But yeah, I need to still DA it and Scotch-Brite it, and obviously then protect it with a Nyalic. But, you know, it's shaping up. As you know, after the DA and the green Scotch-Brite, cleaned it up as necessary and then hit it with a nice coat of Nyalic to give me that matte satin sort of finish to tie in with the rest of the panelling around the car. With the holes drilled in the chassis and riv nuts fixed into place, it was time to finally take the completed diffuser and get it mounted up. To help me avoid replacing the rear window, I thought now would be a good time as any to make myself a new reverse lockout mechanism for the gear shift surround. Now, the system the car came with was made by Tornado, and it's a really nice, elegant solution that basically involves a small cable pull that you can mount inside the cockpit, and that attaches back through to a bracket on the back side of the gearbox. When you pull the cable, that then actuates a small pin which allows you to select reverse. Now, I wanted to, just for sheer aesthetics more than anything, I wanted to make myself a more traditional looking lift up lever that mounts underneath the gear knob. Taking some of these pictures as inspiration, I went about making my own sort of vision, my own concept of what I wanted this surround and lockout to look like. So initially I made myself a very, very crude cardboard template. This gave me the gate that the forward gears required. Once I had made that roughly, I then transferred it through to a piece of 6mm MDF. Here you can see, let me get it right around my way. So that is how you look at it in the car. And what I also did do at this time was start to make the lift up lockout latch. So that would sit in like that as you sat in the car. This would lift up, if my hands don't get in the way too much, and allow you to move the gear stick across and then select reverse. Now, it was at this stage that I was going to CAD it all up and get it laser cut by a company local to where I live. But I thought, just for the fun of it, I have some 6mm alley, so just have a go at making it up. Let me show you the results. The reason I love these cars so much is the fact that you can create something that didn't exist before. And the smallest part, like this reverse lockout mechanism, is just a prime example of that. I knew what I wanted to achieve. I wasn't sure if I was going to get there, and I didn't really know how I was going to get there, but it's the methodical steps and just putting thought into everything you do before you actually do it. I've turned out something that I'm quite pleased with. I've gone for polishing the top plate just to add a little bit of bling to it, and then the support bracket in some 1.6mm aluminium. So it's nice and stout, and then I've just added some dimpled eye detail which I've got throughout the car. The lockout mechanism is really simple. Just lift it up and it stays there. I can then select reverse, and then it just drops back down. I could spring load it if need be, but I think what I'll do is see how it performs out on the road in the real world before making that decision. So I can't delay a job that I've been trying to put off for as long as possible any longer, and that is how I'm going to deal with the broken rear screen. Now, in the last video, you may remember that I covered off, because of the angle that I had to put the engine at to make the gearbox onto the back of it, I ended up putting a carburetor trumpet through the rear screen. What you may or may not remember is the fact that I mentioned that I built myself into a dead end when I was doing this rear bulkhead panel. It's one of the only areas on the entire car that I'd made something irremovable. So the reason I've been putting it off for so long is because I didn't really know how, and I still don't know, how I'm going to quite tackle the removal of this screen. What I did do was, with a scalpel blade, I ran the blade in between the glass and the fiberglass window surround, which has loosened it off a little bit. And then I'm going round with a sharpened palette knife, then getting in between the actual glass frame, which is then bonded to the outside of the bulkhead panel. If any of that makes sense, well done for keeping up. So a little check-in time, running around the edge with that guy. I've managed to get the window surround completely loose. Now, unfortunately, because how tight it is to the aluminium panelling, it's proving to be a bit of a pain in the backside to get out. So I may end up having to split this. It's really tight around these corners. Let me have a bit more jiggling around, see what I can get out without breaking anything more. The frame was not able to come out in one piece. So yeah, there's the remnants of it on the bench. Obviously the interesting thing is, if it can't come out in one piece, then it can't go back in one piece. So I need to come up with a plan B for some sort of finishing surround for the rear window for the inside of the car. I'm going to go around with the same palette knife, just in between the glass and the bulkhead panel, just slipping it in there. I've actually sharpened this palette knife's edge, so it is pretty razor sharp, and then just working my way around, and you can see it's starting to ease off away from that back panel. The last thing I want to do is bend this, so I'm really going to try and take my time.
One eternity later.
Hey! Oh man. A couple of days have passed since I wrestled getting that old screen out of the car, just for one reason or another. But in that time, I managed to track down a local glazing company that can cut any sort of glazing, any thickness, any shape. So I popped down there with the old rear screen and asked if they could cut me a new screen out of some 6mm laminated glass. They said they could do. They gave me a price which was surprisingly cheap, and the following day they had it ready for collection. So here we have the new rear screen, exactly the same shape as the old, which is fantastic, no deviation. So the old one came out without too much hassle, so that means the new one should go in, all being well. So that basically leaves me to test fit it, to see how it does go back in the car, and then have a look about how I can then fix it back into place. Obviously it's going to be bonded, but anything else that I need to do over and above that. So yeah, let's give it a try in the car. Before test fitting the new window, what I did do was go around and grind off all of the old sealant that was around the perimeter of the aperture. It was a messy job, but it all came off to give me a nice clean mating surface. around that back side of the bulkhead. So now that's cleaned up, it'll need a final wipe over, but I can test fit this screen. Fitting the glass in from the inside was so much easier. You can see there's probably a centimetre gap all around the perimeter, which is where I'm going to use the windscreen adhesive, or whatever you want to call it. So I'm just going to run a bead around the inside of the bulkhead panel and then put the windscreen in place. Now, the old frame that can't go back in was purely well, it wasn't even decorative, it was just a thing I decided to reuse. So because this fits so nice and evenly around the rear bulkhead aperture, I'm just going to bond it into place, and it is going to be as good as it was. And then I think maybe what I will do, and something that I never did the first time round, is fabricate up some form of trim to close that gap between the inner and outer bulkhead panel. So yeah, that will just make it look a little bit more finished. I will make that removable. So should this ever happen again, I can get everything out nice and easily. And cutting out a rear screen really wasn't difficult. So I don't mind doing that again, should I ever need to. So I think things are shaping up quite well to get this screen back in. So I'm going to get everything cleaned up and bond it back in once and for all. So running around the perimeter with the windscreen sealant, try to lay down a nice thick bead so when the screen was pressed into place, it had a good even spread of bond around the perimeter of the window. I'm happy with how it turned out, and I've confidence that it will stay where it should do. I made a bit of a throwaway comment that I still needed to make the rear window surround in between the inside face of the new rear screen and the inside bulkhead panel. Now, it was always something that I needed to get done. I didn't do it when I first put the car back on the road. I hadn't really given it much thought on how I could make this surround because it is quite an awkward shape. But now I've got this new screen in, I thought now was as good a time as any to finally get that job ticked off of the list that has been hanging around for absolutely ages. So I want to show you where I've got to, and let me get you caught up. So coming inside the car, around the inside face, I've got a cardboard template. On this template, it highlights that the surround needs to be tapered, and I've also marked up in the corners the positions of the radius of the bends of the bulkhead, if that all makes sense. So that got me thinking, how could I then transfer this to metal? I'd thought about possibly making it out of mild steel and then powder coating it because I would be able to weld it. I can't weld aluminium. I don't have a TIG welder, nor do I have the skill. So that was kind of out the question. So I didn't like the idea of it being made out of mild steel and then powder coated because it wouldn't match the rest of the paneling inside the car. And it's that cohesion that I really sort of strive to get. So that led me down the road of making it out of alley, something that didn't need to be welded. So I started along the lines of using aluminium channel. Bear with me. We've got another step to run through. Oh, if I can get out the car. Coming over to the bench and using my template, excuse the mess, you will see I have this bizarre looking thing. Now, to bend around the radius of the bulkhead, I had to cut this flange off. Even with a stretcher, I wouldn't be able to stretch the metal sufficiently to form that bend. That's no big deal. I think my end vision, this is going to still look well thought out and this not as a hack job. So anyway, there'll be a join in the middle here, so you can see how this is very roughly shaping up. I'll put it in the car now and then show you actually how it looks, because it looks a little bit dubious here, just sat on the bench, but I promise you it will start to make sense. With the surround now in the car, I think you can sort of see how this one's going to start shaping up. I need to do some more fettling. I need to cut off of the inside edge a certain amount, which I've already scribed on the underside, to then allow this to sit flush with the main bulkhead panel. Let's see how this one shapes up. It's going to need a little bit of thought and a bit of fettling, and I'll check in with you once I've made some decisions. After another couple of hours of mucking around, fine tweaking and tuning to get this thing looking how I wanted to, got all of the holes drilled in the rear bulkhead and in the surround, and then it was time to get it riveted in place. So as I've mentioned, this panel is removable just by drilling out those rivets, so no bond was used. All of the rivet holes line up with fixings above and below, just to keep that sort of cohesive design that I've tried to run out throughout the entire car. So as things go, I'm happy with how this one's turned out. That's the end of this episode. I hope you've enjoyed this bumper version. Certainly feels like I've got a fair bit accomplished, even though they are little small projects. It's that continual evolution of this car that I'm really enjoying. Next episode, I'm going to start addressing some of the issues with the bodywork. I do have a bit of a plan, so I'm almost excited to now get stuck in and get this car looking shipshape. So up until then, I will catch you next time.